So having recently ranked what I believe to be the most underrated Western movies of all time, I asked my viewers for their suggestions of Westerns that never really got the attention or credit that they truly deserve. So after tallying up hundreds of comments and recommendations, without further ado, here are the top 10 best hidden gem Westerns as voted for by you. So coming in at number 10, we have Joe Kidd, a 1972 Western starring Robert Duvall and Clint Eastwood. And in the film, Eastwood plays the titular Joe Kidd, an ex-bounty hunter who becomes embroiled in a conflict between a group of Mexican revolutionaries and a wealthy landowner. Now, despite its impressive cast and the experience of the Magnificent Seven director John Sturges, Joe Kidd never really made the impact that you might expect from a Clint Eastwood Western, receiving pretty mixed reviews upon its release. And a lot of this was blamed on the undercooked character of Joe Kidd, who at times felt more like a prop than an active participant in the story, which many felt was played far too safe, coming off as a pale imitation of other famous Westerns. But with that being said, Joe Kidd still has a lot to offer, including typically solid performances from Eastwood and Duvall, as well as a lot of action and memorable moments that make this much maligned Western one worth rediscovering. Up next, we have The Homesman, a 2014 Western starring Hilary Swank and Tommy Lee Jones, who was also the director. And the plot follows a teacher called Mary B. Cuddy, who takes it upon herself to transport a trio of mentally ill women across the frontier, forcing her to rely on the help of George Briggs, a claim jumper that she saved from hanging. Now, although the movie was applauded upon its release for its complex female characters and hard-hitting exploration of mental illness, it would seem that these elements somewhat limited its marketability, with The Homesman ultimately flopping at the box office. However, over time, the movie eventually found an audience and became an easy recommendation, given its excellent performances and powerful story that makes you wonder how The Homesman managed to become so overlooked in the first place. At number 8, we have My Name is Nobody, a spaghetti western comedy starring Terence Hill and Henry Fonda. Now, if you've never seen it, the movie is based on a story by Sergio Leone that follows a young, quirky gunslinger called Nobody who attempts to orchestrate a grand showdown between a gang of outlaws and his sharpshooting idol Jack, a legendary gunslinger who's considering retiring. So based on that synopsis, you might be able to figure out why this movie never quite got the recognition that it deserved, because from start to finish, it's unashamedly bonkers, filled with witty humour, slapstick comedy, and crazy scenarios, which probably isn't to everyone's taste. However, as long as you approach My Name is Nobody with the right expectations, you'll discover that it really is a hidden gem that cleverly blends the western and comedy genres in a way that somehow manages to do justice to both. Next up, we have Old Henry, a relatively new 2021 Western starring Stephen Dorff and Tim Blake Nelson, who plays the titular Henry. Now, I'll do my best not to spoil the plot as much as the trailers did, but story-wise, Old Henry centers around a reclusive widowed farmer and his son, who live a quiet, peaceful life, until a wounded outlaw shows up on their property, drawing them into a deadly showdown with a ruthless gang leader posing as a lawman. Now, based on this, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the plot seems a tad basic, but this underlining simplicity allows the movie to excel in other ways instead, from the tightness of its plot to the authenticity of its action and characters, punching vastly above its weight for such an unassuming independent Western. And as such, Old Henry looks to have overcome its lukewarm release and lack of widespread marketing, largely thanks to word of mouth, becoming an absolute must-watch for fans of character-driven westerns who know their history. At number 6, we have The Quick and the Dead, a 1995 Western directed by Sam Raimi, featuring a star-studded cast that includes Sharon Stone, Gene Hackman, Russell Crowe, and Leonardo DiCaprio. And the film follows a mysterious gunslinger named Ellen, who arrives in the town of Redemption to participate in a deadly quick draw competition, facing off against all manner of sharpshooters in the hope of getting revenge against the ruthless sheriff who killed her father. And again, much like My Name is Nobody, The Quick and the Dead is another one of those movies where its biggest strength could also be seen as its biggest weakness, in that it really doesn't take itself too seriously. Because everything from its cinematography to its action is dialed up to 11, almost feeling like a parody of a Western at times, in that it often prioritizes style over substance. But whether it's to your taste or not, it's this unique sense of style and surrealism that makes The Quick and the Dead so unique and fun, delivering everything that you could possibly want from a Sam Raimi Western. Next, we have Open Range, a Western starring Robert Duvall and Kevin Costner, who also directed. And the film follows cattleman Charlie Waite and his boss, who unintentionally wind up in a violent conflict with a ruthless landowner, forcing closed-off Charlie to face his past and reconsider his future, as he begins to develop a romantic relationship with a woman in town. Now, despite Open Range being a commercial and critical hit upon its release, it still often comes under fire for being too cliché, slow-paced, and sentimental. However, to level these kind of criticisms at Open Range kind of misses the point of the movie, because by design it's really more of a traditional slow burn character study, which won't be to everyone's taste, and is probably the reason why the film found its way onto this list. At number 4, we have Seraphim Falls, a 2006 Western starring Liam Neeson and Pierce Brosnan. And the film follows Gideon, a wanted Union officer who's being relentlessly pursued by Carver, an ex-colonel seeking revenge for events that took place in the Civil War, with the cat-and-mouse game playing out across the harsh, unforgiving frontier while exploring the human cost of violence and war. So as you might imagine, the movie delivers a tense, gripping tale of survival with some striking cinematography and solid performances from Neeson and Brosnan, who seem a perfect fit for the genre. However, there's no question that Seraphim Falls has been underappreciated since its release, most likely because it explores the psychological side of its concept a lot more than you might imagine, making for a bleak, tough watch. But that's not to say it's not worth checking out, as it's still very much a thought-provoking and emotionally resonant Western with a lot to offer. Up next, we have The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, a 2007 Western starring Brad Pitt as Jesse James and Casey Affleck as Robert Ford. So the movie is a dramatization of the relationship between those two real-life outlaws, taking a very deep dive into their complex history and the dramatic events leading up to the final days of Jesse James. Now, upon its release, the movie won a whole load of awards for its cinematography and acting, mainly down to its two leads, who arguably gave the best performances of their careers. But this wasn't enough to stop the movie from becoming a huge box office disappointment. Now, it's hard to say why exactly it was so poorly received, but its deliberate pacing and introspective approach probably had something to do with it. However, over time, The Assassination of Jesse James gradually gained a large fan following, and is now widely considered to be a modern masterpiece within the Western genre, despite many still having yet to watch it. So at number 2, with a huge number of votes, is The Proposition, a 2005 Western starring Guy Pearce and Ray Winstone. And this Western is actually set in Australia, back in the 1880s, and follows Charlie Burns, a captured outlaw who's given a proposition by a ruthless lawman, in which he must kill his fugitive older brother in exchange for the freedom of his innocent younger one. And so, this leads to a tense, deadly mission across the Australian outback, brought to life by memorable characters, breathtaking cinematography, and a haunting score by Nick Cave, as well as a palpable sense of gritty realism that actually went on to inspire the likes of Red Dead Redemption. However, thanks to a limited theatrical release and its dark subject matter, The Proposition seemed to pass most people by, before eventually becoming one of the biggest hidden gems that you're likely to find within the genre. And finally, at number 1, with by far the most votes, was Silverado, a 1985 Western starring Kevin Kline, Scott Glenn, Danny Glover, and a young Kevin Costner. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the film follows 4 gunslingers with very different backgrounds who join forces to save the titular town of Silverado from a greedy landowner and a corrupt sheriff. And quite honestly, Silverado delivers everything that you could possibly want from an 80s Western, full of vibrant characters and crowd-pleasing moments. So add to that a star-studded cast and the assured direction of Lawrence Kasdan, and you would imagine that Silverado should have everything it needs to make a similar sort of pop culture impact to Westerns like Young Guns and Tombstone. But for whatever reason, Silverado just never seemed to cut through in the same way, possibly because of how much it leans on Western cliches and tropes, despite clearly being a candid homage to the genre. Either way, Silverado is well worth a watch, and according to my viewers, the biggest hidden gem Western that you're likely to find. But now that we've got movies covered, I want to know your suggestions for the most underrated Western TV shows ever made, and maybe if there's enough of them, I can make a video about that too. But until then, you might also enjoy this video right here.